Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday. I want to do a little bit of media literacy stuff today because there's news about The Last of Us 2 and it's kind of contradictory. It's one of these things where people can cherry pick the information that best supports their particular theory of the case. And unfortunately, things sort of miss the point in terms of what various data mean. I'm referring, before I forget that, if you like these sorts of videos that are a little bit dry, but I'll try to make them as fun as possible, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. So the one bit of news is that The Last of Us 2 is the most successful PlayStation 4 exclusive launch ever. Unless Ghost of Tsushima kills, it will stand as the most successful PlayStation 4 game launch. Not overall lifetime sales, launch. That's an important distinction. Because with the cost of that game, of The Last of Us 2, 4 million copies isn't enough. I don't know what Sony's internal projections are. Nobody does. But for comparison, the Tomb Raider reboot, when was that? 2011 or something like that? That seems so long ago. But it was considered it did not meet expectations and it moved 7 million units. So just to put that in perspective, the install base on the PS4 is huge right now. And there are no summer movies taking up people's time. And the first game was highly acclaimed, but apparently sales of the first game are now spiking too. It's like number 9 on the UK sales charts. Now, the nice thing about The Last of Us 2 data when it comes to sales is that it's highly unlikely people are downloading this game. It's a 2-disc game. It's huge. It won't fit on most people's PlayStation hard drives with anything else on it. So people are buying the game on disc and installing it manually. So with the reports, the sales reports, we can treat as fairly accurate. We're not relying on the games companies to release their internal data because they only like to do that if it's good. 4 million in sales is a good number opening. It's probably got to do at least double that to be worth the budget, because keep in mind at this point in the console cycle, there is not the secondary knock-on effect of moving systems. Like if a game is one of these showpieces, like the one Uncharted 1 and Uncharted 2 that were out when the PlayStation 3 was lagging behind Xbox in sales, if you looked at the raw sales data for those Uncharted games, they seemed not great compared to some of the other titles out at the time, but they had the secondary benefit of selling systems. Nobody is going to buy a new PS4 right now. They're saving up their pennies to buy a PS5, but we still don't know what that's going to cost. I suspect that if they announce a price for the PS5 before Ghost of Tsushima that will put downward pressure on Tsushima because all of a sudden it's real and people know exactly how much they have to save for a PS5. But that gets away from my second point of data. Obviously, again, the best launch for a PS4 title, probably with the entire cycle, that's good. The fact that it is a very high-profile sequel with maximum market penetration in terms of the number of consoles in people's homes, it is not surprising. It's not the first time a game that has dropped very late in a console cycle that's an exclusive has set a lot of records. But the second part is the thing that must have Sony executives and Naughty Dog executives nervous, if not too nervous. But that's the fact that in the UK, apparently there was an 80% drop off in sales from week one. Now, that's a lot. That's a huge drop off. That can mean one of two things. One, three things. One, the pre-order, the launch day sales were just so huge. There's nobody left interested in buying the game. That's not good for the game's long-term sales. Like I said, it's probably got to sell about double what it's selling right now. Now, with an 80% drop-off, that means add another 20%, it's chugging along, right? Two, people are playing the game, which is only about 30 hours, going in, trading it in, and getting another game because there's no sort of ongoing reason to play The Last of Us 2. So they're just playing the story and flipping it, meaning used copies are ending up in circulation, affecting the original sales, right? That's possible. And I want to add that to be fair, because the third thing a drop off like that can mean is that the bad word of mouth hurt it. Not the controversies, not the scandals, not the online fighting, the bad word of mouth. And that to me is different and more powerful than a Metacritic score or a user score. I know, and this is anecdotal, but this is what's sort of informing my thoughts about it. I know a few people who were super duper excited. They were talking about it. I said nothing. I was not a jerk before the game launched. They were super excited. They couldn't wait to play it. And I was like, I wasn't going to rain on the parade. I wasn't going to try to convince them not to try it, not to give it a shot. I gave it a shot. But as soon as they found out certain plot points, they felt deceived, went, that's not what the marketing made me think it was going to be. That's not the game I want to play. Thanks for saving me some money with your Twitch streams. I want to put in perspective what an 80% drop-off means. 60% for a big tentpole piece of media is average. That's what your average summer blockbuster. Again, there are no summer blockbusters competing with video games this summer. This matters because, one, people have more disposable income to spend on video games and they have more time. They're not going out and seeing the superhero movies that tend to come out in the summer. And let's face it, superhero movies, video games, same consumer base. And so there's that going for The Last of Us 2. And yet there was still 60% is usually average. Movies that went on to not have great word of mouth, like Justice League, I believe had slightly more than 60% drop off. Movies that were considered really, really good, like the Gal Gadot Wonder Woman movie, only had a 45% drop off. That is a very healthy drop off. If you see something that only has a 45% drop off week 2, that movie's gonna go. Like, those are the runs that it's like, go, 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 go. They stay in theaters forever. The original Dragon Age Origins was an example of a game with a very long tail. Dragon Age Origins did not have a great launch. Various reasons for that, but I think part of it was just the type of game it was. It was, before action RPGs became popular, there was this weird thing, what is it? We don't know. Keep in mind, Dragon Age Origins came out before Game of Thrones was a phenomenon, the TV show. But the steady sales, at times it even started rising because the word of mouth on that game series was so good. I do not expect that to be the same based on the Last of Us 2. Not because of the online chatter, but because of these discussions I have had with people who, these are people who are definite gamers. You know, they play things like Division 2 and Destiny and things like that very regularly. I admire their commitment to a single title. I'm like, okay, that's done. What's next? But that's because I just ravenously consume this stuff. But they are legitimate gamers. They're not people who are just, you know, the Madden players or whatever, that they're game-ish, right? They're into this stuff and they care very deeply about this stuff, and they're just like, nope, not interested. That's not what I wanted to put my money into. And the thing about that word of mouth is it can't be manipulated the same way that online message forums and review bombing and all that stuff. I mean, review bombing doesn't hurt things. The Captain Marvel movie got review bombed. The Captain Marvel movie was an movie. It still did very financially well. Just, again, pent up demand. The real test of this game is not only its long-term sales curve, but also how the next game does, and whether the HBO series that's in development, I think it's HBO, but whether that series that's in development continues development. If we see that show kind of go away, that's a sign that it was not well received. If, you know, the alternative is we have to wait for the next game and see how that one sells. And that will be the real indication of how well received this game was. That is, in fact, really the only true test of, because again, you know, the first Chris Nolan Batman movie had to make up a deficit from the past movies. That's why it didn't do nearly as well as the subsequent films. People were excited about seeing subsequent films because they had a good experience with that first one. And so we're going to have to wait a while. If there is a Last of Us 3, I'm not sure there will be. I'm not convinced there will be. But, you know, I don't know what Naughty Dog's going to do next. I have my eye on Insomniac, on the new darling studio of Sony, because they've got the Spider-Man franchise that is just like killing it. And they've also got the Ratchet and Clank games that the time has come for Ratchet and Clank to come back. It stumbled around in the wilderness, trying to do sort of unusual funding models. It is time to bring back the Lombax and Secret Agent Clank. I noticed that tilt on Sony's part back to those PS2 era titles. I suspect it's partially because their market research sees potential for growth in lapsed gamers, people who the last time they owned a system was sort of that PS2 era. They have fondness for those cartoony adventure games. It is also much cheaper to make games that don't require motion capture and things like that. And they need those games that don't make as much money but are also cheaper to make, if that makes any sense. But keep your eye on Insomniac in that regard, because even with some of the misses that some of the Ratchet and Clank games did, they are a very, very, very reliable studio in terms of their output. But back to Last of Us 2. There are going to be a lot of people that use the sales figures to prove the game is good. That is not how this stuff works. Something being popular, something being financially successful, does not mean it is above average in quality. Law & Order Special Victims Unit has been on air for how many friggin' years? Do you think that's the best show on television? I'll just leave it there. People like to use sales data to prove that things are inherently, objectively good craft. And that is not the way it works. The Avengers films again. those films and most movies that are designed to make gobs and gobs and gobs of money, they are designed to make everyone like the movie, not love the movie. Movies that really embed with people, take risks, and critical consensus on truly great, masterful films, they tend to get mixed reviews because people either get what they're doing or they miss it. They don't have the vision to see what is truly revolutionary about these films. You know, the original Star Wars, which was excellent space opera, cheesy dialogue and all. Yes, cheesy dialogue is not a deal breaker when it's something like a space opera. Star Wars was excellent, excellent, excellent space opera. It was exactly what it intended to be. Critics hated it. Critics have hated every single Star Wars movie that came out, and they make gobs and gobs and gobs of money. Now, we saw them declining in how many gobs of money they make. That was a sign, but then, of course, The Mandalorian kicked ass, and it pivoted. But a lot of people think that The Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars movie ever made. Critics hated that film when it first came out because there was an example of a movie that defied expectations. It's now considered a classic. And, you know, Empire did a lot of things right. They had that big twist that everybody went, whoa, the Luke, I am your father, which was not the original way the script was supposed to go. But I believe it was supposed to be Luke, I killed your father, but it wasn't. But then they introduced Yoda, and Yoda is the man. I'm sorry, Yoda is the thing in Star Wars. Much like Cortana is to Halo, Yoda is to Star Wars. You can replace every other character in a Halo game but Cortana and still have a Halo game. You can replace every other character in a Star Wars game except Yoda and still have Star Wars. In my opinion, there's no firm rule to prove that. This is just my opinion. It's a tangible detail that tells you something's going to be good. Case in point, Mandalorian, Baby Yoda, has Yoda, good, right? Clone Wars, all that stuff. Yoda has been, I know it's actually R2-D2, I think is the one who's appeared in every single Star Wars movie because Yoda wasn't in the original one. And R2-D2 is good too. R2-D2 was my first love in Star Wars before Yoda when I was a kid. But I digress. A lot of masterpieces are not critically acclaimed when they come out. That includes works of art. That includes many musicals. That includes some operas. Because they actually leap the art form forward, a lot of people do not get it. And there have been quite a few interesting studies. They're not big data, so I'm not sure how much stock to put in them, but actually show that critical consensus is more about what is agreed upon to be acceptable as opposed to what is truly beautiful or artistic or innovative. And I mean, we can look at other game series to show sort of similar things, right? I mean, Mass Effect 3 sold significantly better than the other two Mass Effect games, and we all know how people felt about that game. The Grand Theft Auto games, I would argue, see, my opinion on the Grand Theft Auto games is they are not excellent games. They are big games. The thing about Grand Theft Auto is you can do pretty much anything you want. They are places to muck about in. I maintain the Saints Row games are better games, even with much smaller budgets. But Grand Theft Auto 3 was way ahead of its time in terms of the stories it chose to tell. And, the fact that I'm talking about Grand Theft Auto 3 and we're in an environment now regarding the corrupt policing communities of color, so on and so forth. Grand Theft Auto 3 successfully allowed me to feel okay with, what was the main character, CJ? With what he was doing. Because you really felt like the deck was stacked against him. And in a world where even the cops are corrupt and violent and criminal, how do you determine morality? I'm like, all right, there are other elements of those games that I found kind of sloppy, but this is doing something really interesting here. This is creating enough of an ambivalent morality in a crime game that even though it's not my thing, I see the value. I see the craft. I see the display of skill, the obvious display of skill here that I have not seen in Grand Theft Auto 4 and Grand Theft Auto 5. I mean, Grand Theft Auto 3, it was one of those games that Grand Theft Auto 3 had all the like Vice City and San Andreas and all that stuff. Am I confusing the games? Maybe that was San Andreas. I don't know. I'm all confused now. But that sort of Grand Theft Auto 3 era, in terms of quality of games for the time, that was the high point. Grand Theft Auto's been coasting ever since. It's been bigger and bigger and bigger, and the Grand Theft Auto multiplayer, Grand Theft Auto 5 multiplayer is fun, but it's just like that spark of brilliance that was in the Halo games. Lost it after Halo 2. Gears lost it after Gears 3. It happens. That tension that is holding the franchise together gets lost for some reason. Some of it is outsourcing, some of it is creators leave, but some of it is just that innovative spark is no longer there. And that's where we get into when you call a game a masterpiece. Be very, very careful. That, to me, is a label you have to defend. You can't just call someone a masterpiece and then challenge people to prove you wrong. You have to make an objective case for something being a masterpiece. Because it's interesting, the origin of the word masterpiece and the way I sort of use it, I guess because of how I came up, and how it's thrown around as a marketing tool now. It's overused. Words like masterpiece, genius, they're way overused as marketing terms to try to hype people up to get in to see the movie or get to watch a TV show and the video game, whatever. But a masterpiece, initially the term comes from the piece of craftsmanship that a journeyman tradesman presented to get his master designation. It was a piece that showed mastery. It displayed skill. Now it's just anything that makes people feel a twinge of the fifis, right? And that's not what the term masterpiece means. The term masterpiece means a work of outstanding creativity, skill, profundity, or workmanship. And this is the litmus test that someone has to apply. They have to show that if they're going to call something a masterpiece, if they claim something is a masterpiece, they have to show one or more of outstanding creativity, skill, profundity, or workmanship. Now, I don't see that big an upgrade in terms of the graphics in Last of Us 2. Now, that is not the fault of the game. That is the fact that there was not, and maybe on the PS Pro, yes, there's that, fine. But that's sort of industry standard now. God of War sort of set the tone. Even Uncharted. I'll give it to Uncharted. Uncharted was the first game I played that had that sort of really, really photorealistic, next-gen graphics, HDR color, and HDR color is friggin' stunning. I don't care what anybody says. It's too bad I can't stream in HDR color because, oh my God, HDR color is so pretty. But Uncharted did it. And that's the thing. A lot of the things that work in Last of Us 2 are repurposed assets from the Uncharted games. It doesn't take a lot of skill to repurpose a mechanic that has already been built and tested elsewhere. You know it works. Like, yeah, okay, that little fixed melee combat thing that they borrowed from Uncharted and repurposed in Last of Us 2, that's kind of neat. That gives it a bit of more kinetic gunplay. It's not sort of running around and hiding behind stuff, and it doesn't make it more realistic. effective combat, proper combat skills, and firearms handling, you don't learn that from video games. I'm sorry. Taking cover in a firefight you don't get 5 gimmies in terms of bullets like you do in a video game. And if you get like shot in the side, you don't get to bandage your arm to do that. Like that's a weird bit of uncanny valley dissonance in The Last of Us 2 for me, but that's a nitpick. I don't care about that. It's the fact that because so much of the tech, and there are little things here and there, the glass breaks are neat. Does that change up the gameplay terribly? Not really. I don't find the tweaks they've done to the stealth mode to be very good, though somebody said if you play on the highest difficulty, it's much better. I don't know why they would save that experience for the highest difficulty, but there you have it. The accessibility tools are interesting, but they didn't create any of those. Those are things other people created that they just had the budget to put all in one place. And to me, that's more showing off their budget instead of really doing something innovative in that regard. Because I have trouble seeing certain things in the base play of the game just because I find it to be too much detail. There's a lot going on. But because so much of the craftsmanship of the game is borrowed, the only pillar of masterpiece that The Last of Us 2 could be considered upon is, I mean, if you want to go with technical achievement, whatever, fine. I disagree, but I guess that's sort of valid. But it's that profundity, that it is exceptionally profound. And that's what makes the work a masterpiece. And there's a reason the word ass is in masterpiece. Not really, but that's funny. Because I fundamentally disagree that even the original Last of Us was all through profound. The juxtaposition of the beginning and the ending was well done. The final decision Joel makes was well done. And that's the problem with The Last of Us 2. It sucks all the nuance out of that choice at the end of Last of Us 1, but more on that in a bit, like on a future video. Like I said, I'm keeping my powder dry for that stuff to give more people time to play the game. But the dialogue is bad, and not deliberately bad in the way that, even Grand Theft Auto and some of the Cyberpunk trailers I've seen, like, they make things deliberately coarse to let you know who the characters are. You know, there are some times where deliberately schmaltzy sort of period dialogue makes sense. It doesn't here. It doesn't here. It's just a miss in terms of character voice. And you can't judge games as movies. You have to judge games as games. And there are so many missteps. There is so much dissonance between the muddy themes of the story and what the game does as a game. I just don't see the profound sentiment there. And I like stuff that's really polarizing. Like I said, I loved Death Stranding. I thought that was an incredibly profound message about human connection and loneliness. And the masculine emotional space. I just finished watching Penny Dreadful City of Angels last night. That's a well-crafted show to me. And not everybody's going to get it because unfortunately people don't know enough about crime noir and the pulps to understand those character tropes are very similar to the way they used, the classic like Dracula and the Wolfman and Dorian Gray and Frankenstein and all that stuff from Victorian horror. it's a really well crafted show. It takes a lot of big risks. It executes phenomenally well. And there are legitimate sequences of just raw beauty in that show. And I'm glad I did that because it makes me realize I'm still capable of being wowed by content now. I am so put off by what The Last of Us 2 is doing that I have been doubting whether I'm kind of at that point where I just can't enjoy anything anymore. And then it's like, no, wait, I really, really like Death Stranding. And I mean, I really did not like the Route A of Nier. I actively hated that because of various bugs and lag, and my system just did not like the game. But then I started seeing what was going on in subsequent routes. The thing about Nier, as rough as, and I would not call Nier a masterpiece. It's a cool story, but it's underfunded for the story it wants to tell, and it needed a lot more refinement. And it's a double A tier game. Like, it is. There's no shame in that. They did an excellent job with the resources they had. It's a great example of asset management. They had a limited number of enemy types, but it never got boring in terms of that. I never felt like the gameplay was lagging. I can't say that with The Last of Us 2. The gameplay lags constantly. There are 45-minute chunks of that game where nothing, absolutely nothing, is happening. And you can't even say, oh, that's to take in the visual majesty, because the first game didn't do that. The first game was like, oh, here's a cutscene where a giraffe goes by. That was pretty. On with zombie slaughter, right? On with... And the first game, it had an interesting new premise for zombies, the cordyceps virus. I don't know why they changed it to just generic calling them infected instead of calling them cordyceps. Because I liked the extra pretense. It gave it that thought out feel, veneer, that gave me something new. It was a change one thing rule. Change one thing, you're a genius. Change two things, you're a mad genius. Change three things, it's never going to work. The thing about having the mushroom zombies and having that new kind of, oh, neat, it's a fungus that affects ants. Interesting. Now it's just the infected. And so it feels less special. And without those sort of tangible details that are like, okay, at least they thought about that, it just sinks in to all the stereotypes. I mean, Last of Us 1 was like a spin the wheel of zombie fiction tropes, right? Like, it just jumped from one to another to another to another. It was kind of predictable the way it went until the end. But it was a fun ride. And the characters are likable, you know? So if you want to say The Last of Us 2 is a great technical achievement, that's great. If you want to say nice tech demo, bro, you can have that. You can make that argument. I'm not playing on a PS Pro, so I can't see those upgrades. I suspect that a lot of PS5 games are just going to... I'm sure The Last of Us 2 will come out on PS5. I'm sure that there's this sort of like already thinking about that re-release. But tech alone is not enough to give a video game masterpiece status. Because tech is not a game. You know, I consider the Avatar movies technical achievements. Are they must-see film? No. Because those effects got moved into everything else and people did them just as well. There was no big, well, that's a new way to tell a story. And that's what I'm seeing games like, you know, a lot of the Japanese, a lot of Japanese products are experimenting with how to tell stories. That's innovation. That's a risk. That's someone displaying mastery of craft. And not everybody's going to get it. You know, you point to review scores. Yes, some of the best games have fairly mediocre reviews. Games that were documented hot messes are very well scored. Look at the reaction to Picasso's work when it first came out. You know? And yes, I may just be a bore and not understand why these things are brilliant. But I don't think that's so. I think it's more that people overuse terms like masterpiece and then use things that have absolutely nothing to do. They use appeals to popularity through sales figures, et cetera, to make arguments based on logical fallacies. They don't argue the merits inherently of the craft. And then they just kind of ignore data that suggests that maybe it isn't going to be the big commercial success that it originally seems to be. But we will track it. I don't want the game to fail, you know? I just get really annoyed with hyperbole. I don't like hype. And my concern is that if there is too much of a hive mind when it comes to objective discussions of things like video games, then truly innovative projects won't get a chance, because much like the dark times in the aughts where everything was a first-person shooter, video game companies are first and foremost money-making entities. And if all we want is the same thing over and over and over again, all we're going to get is the same thing over and over and over again. And I don't think anybody wants to go back to that. So, more on this in the coming days, obviously, because you guys seem to like it. And not just you guys seem to like it, it seems to be thought-provoking. So, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.